Hello everyone, this is Yalda from Eat, Burn, Sleep, the online low inflammation, gut health and sustained weight loss platform. If you follow me on my social media, you probably know that I love learning, discovering new things, meeting passionate individuals. So I have decided to launch this podcast where I interview amazing people. We're going to be talking about physical health, mental health, well-being, with people who are passionate about what they do and who strive for excellence. I hope you learn from it and you enjoy it. Let's get started. Today I have the honor of hosting Vanessa Branson, who's a serial entrepreneur and one of the most inspiring women I have ever met. I hope you enjoy this chat. As all my podcasts, they are meant to, elevate your soul, open your mind. So enjoy the ride and jump in with us on this conversation. Hi, Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my absolute pleasure. And what a fortuitous meeting we had.
I know. Vanessa and I bumped into each other this morning. There was a show at Somerset House of my late cousin Layla's Alawi's pictures. And as I was coming out, actually, I started having tears in my eyes because I got a bit emotional about Layla, thinking what an amazing show, what a shame she's missing it. And just as I'm about to start crying, I feel like my cousin has sent our mutual friend Vanessa, and let's recall our first meeting.
Well, I know. I mean, it was just, when you just mentioned Layla, it's confusing because she was one of the most beautiful, talented and kind and proactive women I've met, actually. I knew her from the Marrakesh Biennial when I just started it out, and she helped me so much. And then she was sadly killed when she was 32. And there's a wonderful, wonderful tribute show for her at Somerset House. And it was really moving to see her again there.
Yes, it was indeed. So for those of you who don't know her work, you can look it up. It's Layla Alawi. And Vanessa and I met years ago, I think in 2013. And it was at a dinner and I was sat next to you. And you looked at me and I said to you, I'm half Moroccan, half Iranian. And you said, "Are you Layla Alawi's cousin?" And I said, "Yes." "How do you know?" And you said, "Because you look so alike."
Well, you do. I mean, I can't imagine that I was the first person to say that to you.
But you were the first person to see me and say, "You guys are related."
Two beautiful cousins. So it was, your smiles are identical. So
Yes,
sang out.
But Vanessa, we're here to talk about you, and I would love to, share a bit more of your story with my followers for them to get to know, young men, young women, to truly understand what makes an entrepreneur. You have had art galleries, you have a hotel in Marrakesh Al Fan, you have an island in Scotland, you have written books, you are the founder of the Marrakesh Art Biennale, and clearly you come from a prominent family of entrepreneurs, being Richard Branson's sister. What would you say makes you all so proactive and full of energy to take on all these projects?
Wow, that's a complicated thing to answer, and it takes a sort of, I've just written my book, my memoir, and I didn't know where we came from, and I really wanted to investigate what made us, my generation, who we were. And it's a sort of confluence of having remarkable parents, but also being born in the times that we were born in. My mum and dad were married just after the Second World War, and they'd been through a pretty rough time of it. I think the wars, can be rather sort of glamorized, and they had a lot of fun, but actually it was also hell. And the dark days of the 50s, they were very sort of bleak days, but they were fun, and they had witnessed such horror during the war. They just wanted to embrace every day as if it was their last, and they were funny people, and they made everything so much fun. There was no money sloshing around, but we had a really fun childhood. And the other thing that sort of defined us is that we're all dyslexic. Both my parents are dyslexic. My brother, sister, and myself we're completely unemployable. So we had no option but to work for ourselves. And that's been a sort of driving force. But also, in the late 60s, 70s when I got cracking, I was born in 1959, anything felt possible. I mean, it just all felt so possible. I can't really describe I left school when I was 16. And that was the other thing, is we didn't waste any time in education. We just sort of got cracking very young. And there was such a sort of there was such a freedom. We had such freedom to experiment, try things. It felt really cool to be young. It felt like, we felt as if we were, I mean, maybe every generation feels that they're the chosen ones, but we really felt it in the 70s, 80s. And we had a lot of fun. It was just not so serious somehow.
Oh my God, what you're saying makes complete sense. I find that things that I have done the best in my life are where I never thought about it as work, but as fun. And work brings that dimension where you have to perform and be perfect and can be quite daunting. Whilst if you think you're having fun, you're removing that pressure to do well. And I guess it can allow one to expand more and really, function at the best of one's abilities.
Well, I'll say two things. I think it's good to aim, shoot for the sky, have dreams. We have a sort of family, all of my siblings, my two sibs and myself, we have what we like to call focused enthusiasm. Some might call it obsession. Some call it a passion. But when we want to do something, we think of nothing else and completely go for it. And it becomes a sort of burning thing to do. The other thing that we're quite good at is surrounding ourselves with very good people. And so give other people power around you and magic happens as well. So the combination of these things, giving pleasure to other people who work with you and having that focused enthusiasm is a good one.
Amazing. And I remember you telling me, so I've met your mum, Eve, and I'll never forget that meeting. We've met a few times, but I still remember the drinks on the beach, and she was so full of energy and bossing everyone around. And and you said to me that your mum was very good at not instilling fears in all of you.
Well, quite the opposite. I mean, her way of doing this was to always just say, have courage, have courage. When she dropped us off at school, there was no, nowadays when parents say to their children, be safe, all you're doing is telling them it's a frightening world out there. And actually, it isn't frightening. I remember the bloody stranger danger campaign when my kids were young. And, when policemen actually went into the classrooms and told the children that strangers were dangerous. And I remember feeling that was the beginning of the end, because actually, 99.999% of people are not dangerous, and to tell children that they are is horrible. The most dangerous thing in most people's lives is the creepy uncle, to be honest. Anyhow, setting that aside, I think it's a great gift to give to your kids, to say that, embrace, challenge yourself. And, don't take unnecessary risks, because that's just silly, but, challenge yourself, push yourself, and embrace the new, and don't be frightened of new ideas.
Yeah, it's true that we live in a society where, I can see my children, they have so much less freedom than I had as a child. And I try and, get them a bit freer and get them to do things and make them a bit more independent and all of that. But we do live in a society of helicopter parenting, and it has been shown. There's been several books written about this. It's really detrimental.
Well, I think it's probably the fault of the mobile phone, to be honest. I think when we were young, it was sort of out of sight, out of mind, and literally we'd just disappear for the day. And, really, our parents didn't know where we were. As long as we were sort of home for supper, they didn't really take note of what we were doing.
So you see, I could never imagine myself do that. But clearly your mum did it right. And there is something else you told me about her, which I thought was fascinating, was the fact that every time you travel to a foreign country, she would make you drink a little bit of tap water to strengthen your gut and your immunity.
Well, not only that, she wasn't the best cook in the world, and we had a vegetable garden. She was her mother was very advanced in thinking about, her mother used to say, a salad without 10 ingredients has no right to call itself a salad. Very, very interested in raw foods for pale people. She was really ahead of her time with food ideas. Any processed food, she hated it. Always eat butter, never eat margarine. She was 100, so I listened to what she was saying. My mother's very similar, but she took it one step further. When the lettuce was cut off from the vegetable garden, she would literally just flick the slugs off and put it between some bread and make us eat it. There was very little. She doesn't really believe in washing up liquid, to be honest, because she thinks that's worse for you than
but she's right.
Chemicals around the house. Hated all that.
But she's so right. There's something now that the scientists have labeled the hygiene hypothesis. And we can see that, the incidence of autoimmune diseases in India, in sub-Saharan Africa are less. And one of the reasons, it's not just the fact that there is sun and vitamin D, it's also because there's less chemicals around. And with COVID, we have noticed that as well. They have less inflammation, less chronic inflammation, and as a result, they have less complications linked to viruses like coronavirus.
I saw that it's even happening to people's dogs. Dogs are getting more allergies now because it's all too clean. They're not allowed to, drink from puddles and things. So I think a little bit of grit does you good.
It does. So when I started learning about this, now I buy organic carrots, and generally there is sand on them. I rinse them, but I do not peel them. So I have a little bit of that dirt. We're all too clean. And now with all this hand gel and all of this, yes, we're killing the viruses, but we're also killing all the bacteria. And we have bacteria on our hands. We have bacteria in our gut. There's even a little cloud of bacteria around us. It's called the holobiome. So every single person has 2 kilos of bacteria in their gut. Their skin everywhere is covered, but also in the air around each person. And it's so crucial. They have done studies where they've seen, there is this amazing book called The Longevity Project, where they have studied people who live under the same household. They're more likely to have similar healths than people who are linked genetically like twins, because they share a similar holobiome. So all of this to say, your gut bacteria and the dirt you put inside of you, like Eve did, is the way to keep healthy.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely sure of it. I mean, it's complicated though. I do feel very sorry for young parents now to know how to navigate through. I think probably the secret is not to watch too much scary content. And just try and extrapolate figures as much as possible and realise that there's an awful lot of people out there and there's very little disease and there's very little to worry about, to be honest.
Yeah, and I find that, there is a huge issue in society now, which is perfectionism. Your mother didn't care about being perfect. She was like, the kids are out of the house, great, I can get on with my day. And now most parents want to do it right, and that really sets us up for failure. And there is something that really freed me. I realized that there are some great people with the worst parents and some people who were blessed with the best parents who turned out terribly. And that freed me as a parent. And I thought, you know what? I'm not perfect. Let's just get on with it. And I often tell my children, if they say, yeah, Mom, your children, they love complaining. Oh, yes, on your Instagram, you always smile, but they don't see when you tell us off, And I'm like, yeah, get on with it, guys. Hard luck. I'm not perfect. I'm not. and that's how it is. Or if I make a mistake, I'm like, I'm not perfect. I got this one wrong. And you're not perfect either. It's fine. It's life. Let's get on with it.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think even, for those who don't have children, to not beat yourself up for not being perfect. It's such a great moment when we can be free. I do think that the lockdown was very liberating for those, had a sort of public persona where our hair was perfect. Not that mine ever was, and suddenly I see many more sort of very more casual profile pictures on top of LinkedIn photographs or, their profiles, and people are just relaxing a bit. I really believe that, they realize what the priorities are, and you don't have to have a super perfect body and all those sort of things. It's much better to be relaxed and good company than look pristine.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me, the beauty of this lockdown was that first there was no more FOMO. There was nothing to miss out on. And also, it's the first time in our lifetime that every single person on this planet is affected by the same thing at the same time. And I think that just brought us back to our humanity and the fact that we are all vulnerable. It doesn't matter who you are, how much you have. Yes, of course, doing a lockdown in a big house is easier than in a small flat. We all agree on that. But it was a leveler. And I think...
Yes, it was. I think we've got to be very careful, though, because, it was a storm that affected everybody. But, I know it's a bit of a cliche to say this now, but we were all in different boats. And I think those of us, who are lucky enough to have lived healthy lives just didn't feel threatened by the virus in the same way that those who haven't been as fortunate. Mm-hmm. And I think people have had a very different experience of it. And those of us who are not financially threatened by it, immediately. I think the stress for some people has been intolerable, to be honest. And I think for young people just going to university and all being locked up, I think it's terrible. And I think the long-term effects of this we mustn't underplay it.
I feel particularly sorry, actually, for old people, because I find that the older we get, the more fragile we are. Mm-hmm. We're actually stronger when we're younger. And I've heard so many stories of people saying how their parents, yes, they did not catch it, but because they lost, their little habits that kept them healthy, of social connections. And that is, I thought, was quite hard to hear. But I wanted to ask you about your book.
Well, it has been an all-encompassing. It was a complete focused enthusiasm moment. And it's been an extraordinary experience. Everybody says that they've got a book in them. And I knew when I started, there was that dogged determination that if I started a book, I'd have to bloody finish it. And it just overwhelmed me. And they take a long time, books. They take a long time to write. So back in 20th of January, 1917, I was in a yoga retreat in Sri Lanka. And
1917.
2017.
Oh, 2017.
Okay. 2017. I'm not that old. And I was with a friend of mine and we thought we'd just tune into Donald Trump's inauguration. It just seemed important that we just went on the BBC News website and there was a photograph of him there saying that his crowd was bigger than Barack Obama's. And I just felt such a feeling of complete and utter despair. Thought I'd just write about my father, whose values and sort of approach to humanity was so at odds with Donald Trump's. I just sort of wanted to cling on to something that would just give me some foundation back to my life again. So I just wrote about my father. And then when I started honouring my parents' generation, I just sort of carried on writing, and it became a memoir. When you start writing about your own memories, life gets really interesting again. But my father was born in 1918 and I finished it in 2018. So the book's called 100 Summers.
I was going to ask you, why did you call it? Oh, that's why. Okay. I was wondering where the title came from.
Well, 1918 was a really fascinating year in UK history because it was the end of the First World War. But it was also when women first got the vote. So I sort of followed 3 generations of feminism through as well. I'm fascinated by women and how we navigate our way through. It's not easy, really. And so that was a sort of a thread that came out. It's an extraordinary thing writing a memoir because it's not you don't write it sort of completely chronologically. Basically, I sort of dragged my fingers through the sediment of the river of my life and just caught the bubbles as they bubbled up. Mm-hmm. And you sometimes wonder why that bubble was so relevant and write about it. And then years later, you think, God, that was why I wanted to write about that, because it sort of joins up to something later on. And you learn so much about yourself, but about, I looked into, obviously, none of us are journeying our way through in isolation, and history has such an impact on our families, and I found that really fascinating. And then I found the whole, the relationship I had with, actually my first boyfriend was from Iraq, and I think that was my secret passion for North Africa and the Middle East, and that hadn't occurred to me until that moment. And so all these little things, everything started sort of tying up and making sense, so it was really interesting.
Amazing. It's so true about feminism. I remember growing up thinking, why are they feminists? Of course we're equal. And they used to annoy me. I'll be honest with you. Feminists used to annoy me. I used to think, okay, it's women who just don't want to look good and they protest. But for me, it was so obvious that men and women are different, but both have roles that are relevant, that I didn't see the point. And I have evolved massively up to reading Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, recently, and where she describes that so many women will go and graduate with masters and all of that only to not be used part of the workforce, which is detrimental to society. If you have great brains, people who might invent vaccines, who might, make society go forward, then yes, it's great to look after a home, but they should also be utilized. And we're losing so much of the workforce like that. And it occurred to me that I went to a business school in France, EDEC, and then I did a postgraduate in accounting and finance at the London School of Economics. And when I got married, I became a housewife. And I did exactly that. So I was ambitious for myself. And I'm not saying being a housewife is bad. I'm not saying that at all. But that's what happened. I spent all this time and money in education, and I did work in finance, but then I stopped utilizing it. And it's made me realize my ex-husband is a very clever guy and all of that, but I'm more educated than him, and he was the breadwinner. And she was giving the example of her grandmother, who was super smart and all of that, but was not given the chance to become an entrepreneur and be successful or even part of a big corporation like Sheryl is. And I find that this whole feminism thing, I'm trying to educate my boys about it in the most not antagonist manner, so they understand that for the greater good of society, maybe some men should stay home and maybe some women should work. And it's not straightforward depending on what your gender is.
I think that's great that you're bringing up your boys to think like that. Well, it's interesting for you, Yelda, one of the most seemingly confident women that I know, and clever and educated and out there, that you allowed that to happen. But I think you probably did it because it was your choice. You were, I don't know the circumstances, but you had a choice. You positioned yourself and had a choice. I think where feminism has a long way to go is that a lot of women don't have a choice, and we need to make that absolutely happen.
Well, I had a choice, yes and no. I worked in foreign exchange, and I had to be on the trading floor every day at 6:30. Mm-hmm. And I finished work at the earliest 5:30 p.m. So I knew that to be in Canary Wharf at 6:30, I have to wake up at 4:45, and that I would barely see my kids. But now banks give the opportunity to women to work part-time. But back then, you knew that from the moment you had a baby, if you decided to be part-time, you would never get the bonuses. And it's such an intense, hard work. It's not worth doing if you're not getting the bonus or a substantial bonus to make up for that hard work. And I knew that it's a job where you need to be in front of your screen, follow the markets. You need to be there all the time. So it was a choice, yes, but also it wasn't a choice because there wasn't the infrastructure for me to continue working within that institution. And then afterwards, I remember when I was at home, I was thinking, oh my God, I should have become a doctor or a teacher because that you can do part-time. And I thought, why didn't I put more thought into this before studying? I should have thought about what happens when I have children. And it's true, I didn't think it through. But hopefully companies, especially now with everything that's happened, will give more and more chances for women to do things from home and for men and, to have a more balanced life where you can actually have a career and a family and no one has to give anything up if they want to. And
that's
again,
the dream.
And then again, it's a personal choice. Yeah.
I remember driving in Saudi Arabia and talking to my the guide in the back of the car with me, and I said, what do you think about women driving? And he said, oh, for God's sake, I'm dying for them to be able to drive because at the moment I have to do everything. And so you just saw it completely from a male point of view. But at the moment, without women being able to drive, he was having to take his kids to school, he was having to take them to the hospital, he was having to do the shopping, and he was just exasperated. And at that point, I knew that women were going to be able to drive very soon, because it wasn't anything to do with how they felt about it. It was just to support the men. But
it's very true. Happen. It's the same with work, right? It's a shame to not get someone to do something they can do. But luckily things are getting better, and I can see people who, so I'm 42, I can see people in their 20s, they think so differently. Even my children, there's a level of tolerance that's actually amazing. And I'm so grateful for that.
I do hope that the Instagram, just going back, if you think of feminism as just not judging people by their looks or their gender, I hope this obsession with looks is going to be a passing phase with young people, just, the selfie generation. That worries me a bit.
I don't think it's going to pass, because humans have always been obsessed with looks. It's just that they didn't have Instagram before.
I know. My goddaughter, I worry for her, and the little ones. Just, it won't, let's see where it plays out. I don't want to sound like a fuddy-duddy.
But social media is becoming a platform that's for so many other things. When I started doing this, there were quite a few people in my industry, like from finance, who were like, "What, you're doing this?" And I said, "Listen, it's just like newspapers. You have everything from The Sun all the way to The Economist. And right now on social media, there's a lot of The Sun, but it's going to be an incredible platform, an outlet for all sorts of things. And that's what's happening. So I think it's going to rebalance gradually, and everyone's going to go for what they care for, I'm hoping.
Yeah, good. Well, let's hope. If we've got people like you doing this sort of thing, it's going to be fine.
So, Vanessa, your book, 100 Summers, is available on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So I will link it up on my website so people can purchase it.
And the audio version, because I've read that as well.
You've read it with your beautiful voice. Amazing.
Oh, it's an extraordinary experience. You sit in a little box for 4 days and just read, and and then you think, oh gosh, is anybody going to hear this? And it's been going down really well. So
amazing. I love it when authors read their own books. I much prefer it than voices, I find them, you feel the content much better. So that's amazing. Well done, you.
Actually, I was reading one memory, and it involved my grandmother, who we talked about earlier on, and I found myself just starting to cry while I was reading the story.
Oh my God.
And then it was an Australian production company that did it, and then they sent it back and said, I think you should read this over. And the British production team said, no, we need to, so we left it in. But it's not an obvious snivelly sort of cry, but it was just this sort of feeling of voice cracking up, because it just moved me so much reading it in this little box, and just, anyhow. But, yeah.
That's amazing. Amazing. So everyone watch out for that moment. So Vanessa, before we wrap up, what is the next project?
Well, I've got some really exciting projects on at the moment. And that's the great feeling when you've got a portfolio of projects that can complement each other. Sadly, during lockdown, my hotel in Morocco has been closed, but we have been building a massive building project. It was great. It was closed, actually, because we managed to get that done. And we're opening at the beginning of November.
So the hotel,
for the restaurant.
Sorry to interrupt you. The hotel is called El Fen, which means art in Arabic. And it is in the Medina of Marrakesh, quite close to the big square, Jamal Fna. It's a beautiful place to stay, so do visit it if you go to Marrakesh.
Thank you, Yelda. The other project I've got is an island off the west coast of Scotland, and that's really come into its own, and it's the wilderness, and it's the most beautiful place, and pristine waters, but I'm making it into a nature reserve, and so I'm learning a lot, and so that's been a great project. And I'm writing some more. I'm writing some stories at the same time as my first novel. So it's the most extraordinary thing to do. I have no idea if it's any good. I've written 40 pages, and I'm excited to get back to it. Just talking to you now, I'm thinking, oh, what's she going to do? What's she going to do? I have no idea where my protagonist is going. And some terrible things have happened already. And I had no idea when I started. But we'll see what happens. We'll see.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Yelda, and I look forward to hearing how this comes out.
Yes, I will let you know when it does. Thank you to all of you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to rate and review the podcast, and you can head on to eatburnsleep.com to check the links for Vanessa's book, and you can go on Google and check Elfen, ELFENN, for her hotel in Marrakesh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to go on eatburnsleep.com to learn more about gut health and chronic inflammation. I would really appreciate if you could rate this podcast, and of course feel free to share it with anyone who might enjoy it. Have a beautiful day.